Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. Today, finally airing the Chris Abbott conversation. Apologies to Chris. I want to say it's been 3 weeks. It's hopefully only been 2 weeks, but I'm embarrassed how long it's taken me to get this audio out. But before we begin the conversation, I wanted to say that when I called this a prodcast, I wasn't joking. I've had 2 listeners so far contact me associated with the lead pile, and I sent them collectively around £7 worth of lead. So for folks who are still listening, I still have probably at least another £7, if not potentially upwards of £10 worth of lead to send on to listeners. So if this is something that interests you, if you want to get a vast quantity of figures of all possible, well, they're all 28mm, so they're all the same scale, but of all possible genres, of all possible interests, of a wide variety of different things. One of the folks that corresponded with me noted that they were going to figure paint them. In fact, I'll just give shout-outs to Stephen Vaughan Jr., and Mike King, because these are the 2 gentlemen who contacted me associated with taking some of the lead pile off my hands. But if you too would like to take some of this lead pile off my hands, please, barbalet@gmail.com, Bravo Alpha Romeo, Bravo Alpha Lima Echo Tango @gmail.com. You cannot believe the catharsis going to the post office and sending out these parcels to these 2 listeners. I also threw in some Goblin Gaming stickers, so if you want those Goblin Gaming stickers as well, you can get a vast quantity of lead plus Goblin Gaming. And, of course, at no cost to you. You're doing me the favour. I wanted to say that when I came back from the post office, I had a large parcel of painted figures. And actually, it was a smaller number of painted figures than I assumed would be there. But it just made me realise that packing away the painted figures, sending out the unpainted figures and getting back a small selection of painted figures was just such a nice experience. And in stark contrast to the experience I had a couple of weeks ago, which caused me to let go 2 figure painters. In any case, again, go back to Long Funk, I think it's episode 49, for more information on that particular scenario. But I've wasted too much time already. Let's get into this wonderful chat with Chris Abbott. My hope is that I'll have a chance to chat with Chris sometime. It's not going to be for a couple of weeks, unfortunately. I'm doing a bit of travel. But when I get back from that travel, I'm looking forward to having another chat with Chris Abbott, because as you'll hear from this audio, he's able to turn things around, polish them off, and send them on their merry way. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
I'm doing okay. First day of daylight saving, which is always fun. Sunday morning for that. It's Sunday afternoon for you, so you've had a little bit more time to recover. But I have my coffee close by, and hopefully I will mute through all loud swallows accordingly. So we haven't had a chance to chat for quite some time. I think I've been to the UK and back since we last talked, and I don't have a script today. I've got a few topics I'd like to discuss, but I'm sure you have a few topics you'd like to discuss as well. So why don't we start with your topics? Do you have any topics, any pressing topics you'd like to discuss?
Pressing topics. I just realized this morning when my podcatcher went to update the feed that there was an extensive discussion that you had with Matthew several days ago, and I haven't been able to listen to more than 20 minutes of it so far. It sounded fascinating. Got it queued up for later, but
very good.
You had been speaking at the point of the recording that I'd made it to. You'd been speaking about some of the racial and gender modifications to attributes in different game systems.
Yes.
And I was able to verify with reaching into my stack here and finding the D&D First Edition, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition, most definitely treated gender differences very extensively.
Right. That's what I thought.
There were a number of significant penalties for choosing female characters. Second edition, as far as I'm able to tell, of AD&D has only one sentence on the subject of sex in the whole book of Player's Handbook, and that is you can play your gender or you may play the opposite, and that's it. There's nothing else said. There's no tables. There's no modifications.
Interesting.
Palladium RPG, which was dated about 1981, 1983, some time frame. I was surprised to find there was nothing whatsoever mentioned in it, considering the prevailing attitudes at the time. There were no penalties associated with choice.
Kevin Sabita wanted women to play. I mean, my suspicion is that actually Kevin Sabita, it's interesting actually, I'm reading the GURPS rules currently. I accidentally purchased a vast quantity.
Which edition?
Well, Let me explain this, how I got into the situation. I am meeting Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson in the UK at the end of August.
Oh, wonderful.
So I went onto ABE Books and picked up a wide variety of fighting fantasy books to remind myself a little bit about them. I mean, I do have failing memories associated with fighting fantasy. And in the process, I saw the GURPS rules. And I thought, oh, yeah, Steve Jackson also wrote GURPS, didn't he?
Oh, yes.
So, well, it turns out he didn't. Turns out there are two Steve Jacksons, which I already knew, and I should have been hip to this game. There's the UK Steve Jackson, and then there's the US Steve Jackson. And more interestingly, the US Steve Jackson actually wrote some fighting fantasies together with the UK Steve Jackson.
Okay.
So GURPS is the US Steve Jackson. And what fascinated me, and I'm assuming, look, I picked up, I'm starting to work this out, it's either 16 or 18 books with postage for just over $80. So, yeah, I mean, my perspective is I could have gone on to Drive-Thru RPG and probably gotten something similar, but I actually wanted the smell. Mm-hmm. I'm a thorough... Books, to me, are a real tactile thing, and if I need the rules, I'll get them in PDF. If I want to reminisce, I'd like to have the books in front of me. The only problem I've found doing that is more often than not, particularly for the prices that I pay for them, the books have been owned by smokers previously. So I bought a bunch of White Dwarfs recently. In fact, I had a stack of them in the get to the charity shop to recycle pile. And unfortunately, the previous owner was a heavy smoker, and every page is a new aroma of, I don't know, high school toilets, I guess. Anyway, so moving back from this. So I've been reading the GURPS rules recently. I'm assuming for the price I paid, they were the first edition ones. And what fascinates me is how similar they are to the Palladium rules. I mean, not similar in terms of, like, general rules, but similar in terms of appearance, layout, and just general style. One of the things that GURPS has, which I love, which Palladium doesn't have, is they have the rules written into long and winding sentences. So you don't, with the Palladium stuff, all the stats are up front, you know. Mm-hmm. You've got a Kalashnikov, you know the dice, you know everything about the Kalashnikov in neat statistics. In GURPS, it's part of 4 paragraphs that you have to read through leisurely and extract what the actual statistics are out of the... But that, anyway, finite distinction. What's interesting that I found in the past couple of weeks, the real Steve Jackson, the one that I'm going to be meeting, worked on the close combat rules. I'm not sure if you've ever played Close Combat. It's a PC and Mac game framed in the Second World War.
No, I haven't.
It is an amazing game. It's an amazing game because you have many different options in how you choose to play it. You can play it very much from a kind of top-down general, just sending your troops over in various directions. But you could also play it down at the kind of squad level as well. The AI is remarkable. It came out in, I want to say the late 90s, but it was really 2000 through to about 2008. They did an Iraq version, which I think is a fascinating game as well, but used the AI logic. Unfortunately, if ever there were a game that I would want it to be open source, it would be the Close Combat game or series of games, because I think the AI behind it is spectacular. But the AI behind it, and Mike King also asked questions as well, the AI behind it is also very easily played out through standard wargame rules with just objectives and maybe cards or activation markers or these kind of things. And I hope to have a conversation, if I can nerd out in that direction, with the UK Steve Jackson associated with working on Close Combat.
You had purchased these GURPS rules on a whim, and I was in a secondhand bookshop just yesterday, and they had a stack of probably 24 third edition GURPS rule books. I did not purchase them all, I swear. However, I couldn't pass up the core rule book, the 2 compendia that expanded it, and the Traveler rules, which I have long heard of their adoption of, but have never laid my hands on. So I didn't get quite as good a deal as you did on your rules, but I thought I got a decent price, and I ended up staying up till 3 a.m. Paging through last night. And, yes, so today was a little bit of a late start, I must admit.
Very good. So we're in similar mind states, except I'm 3 hours earlier in the experience. Yes. No, look, just a really fascinating... I mean, the nature of this hobby in terms of being provided stuff by the people around you, I couldn't understand why I hadn't played GURPS previously, aside from the fact that no one I knew played GURPS.
Exactly.
So it is an amazing rule set just to go through, and the level of detail is certainly Sabita-esque. In fact, I'm wondering which came first now, or maybe they were just basically overlapping.
They were contemporary because even the third edition rules first printing is 1981, and if that's third edition, then Steve was working on it quite significantly before that.
So it must be ahead of Sabita. I mean, Sabita is the 80s, right? The late 80s. Although it's probably based on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Robotech. But Sabita wrote his rules in the mid to late 80s, but I could be wrong in that. When did you meet Sabita?
Origins, 1985.
Okay, so he was already famous by then. So you have the primary source here. He clearly has been writing rules from the early 80s.
Oh yeah, because at that point in time, and I swear, somewhere in this massive pile of things here, I have printer's proofs of the TMNT cover of the actual book. It was flat sheets, not cut out, not folded, not applied to anything, with the registration marks and everything on them. He had them with him at Origins.
Wow.
Picked up 2 or 3 of those, I think.
Wow.
And I also picked up the Weapons and Assassins.
Oh my goodness!
Weapons and Armor book from him at the time. We had an interesting conversation because I'd been messing around with his FRP rules for probably a year and change by that time, because the revised edition of his fantasy rules came out in 84, was the second printing. So the initial printing was in 83 or 82. And so it was already well on its way, and he had been producing the accessory books, the reference books prior to that. So
yeah,
very definitely a long and storied past in this hobby.
Certainly,
we keep running into the same figures as we go back in time. But yeah, and I also bought some. He had some artwork that he was limited edition prints that I picked up at the time too.
Gosh,
dragons, very nicely. Yeah, it was good. It was a good day. It was a very good day to meet him.
Wonderful. Yes, he's someone who, if listeners to this podcast can find podcast recordings of him, I've certainly listened to at least half a dozen interviews that he's done with various podcasts. And, fascinating polymath. I mean, just many different life experiences. And I don't know about the American Steve Jackson, but the ability for these people to have defined a lifetime's worth of work doing stuff which is so esoteric and fun.
Yeah, well, it does seem to be
impressive.
A defining aspect of the participants, that they have these wide-ranging areas of interest as opposed to being super focused on one aspect. They have their hand in everything, from modeling to war games to computer simulations to art to creative writing and history. And the RPG hobby seems to bring those all together in this wonderful blend that there's no area to express that adequately in any other. Even movies might be the closest thing where you could blend all of those interests together and get something delightful out of it. But RPGs are definitely they're underappreciated for what they represent, I think.
It is fascinating. Certainly the people that I tracked at Games Workshop, many of them went into video games. A few of them went to work for the BBC and did just amazing sets and costumes, and some worked on Doctor Who and these kind of things. I mean, it is interesting, as you say, the multifaceted Venns of so many different areas that come through this thing. I guess from my perspective, because I include war games in there as well, and to a certain extent board games too, I think there's just an ability to spend one's life creating rich alternative environments, for want of a better term. Just strikes me as, this is a golden age. I knew, historically there've always been commissioned folks that created art and music and all this kind of stuff. But the ability to do it, to spread this inspiration so widely, it's just astonishing. I mean, I wonder if there is going to be such an ease of production in this light for future generations. I mean, this was part of the discussion with Matthew in the last recording when he talks about his son's group and the fact that fantasy and imagination and all these kind of things are no longer implicit. They're actually something which is, novel, which I find very curious. I think there might be changes associated with the young, the exposure of young folk to various electronic devices. Does this rob time away that would have previously been spent, through imaginative play? Does it create a different kind of imaginative play? I mean, these are interesting questions, particularly associated with an industry, as we've talked historically, associated with the model railroading hobby, the wargaming hobby and the role-playing game hobby and, all these things, these imagination-based environments involving dice, let's just call them that. That requires a very particular kind of person. And what seems to be happening here is that the younger market doesn't seem to be as there and as rich and as vibrant as historically been the case. And although when I go into game stores, and I'm very lucky, although a big one closed recently, Endgame in Oakland closed, unfortunately, which was a sad closure. When I go into these game stores, they oftentimes are parents with children and parents who clearly had an interest in the stuff and kids that are, picking up an interest. But I do wonder what will happen to this hobby, or whether, as, companies like Games Workshop have done, the movement into video games, into fiction, into a wide variety of other areas is actually going to keep this thing alive for future generations. What are your thoughts on this, Chris?
I would agree that there is a decrease in personal activity for the young people in the creative vein. So with video games and so many distractions that offer immediate gratification, sort of the punch and go rather than the long slog where you're as a GM, you're going to sit down and you're going to spend 6 or 7 afternoons post schoolwork and hammer out a region and describe the NPCs and note this all down so that you may have a couple of weekends of fun with your friends. There's a lot less feedback, immediate feedback in that sort of effort. But then you see it in all manner of creative outlets, whether it's crafting or building models or photography. I mean, high school, we had the photography club. We had, the music stuff. There seems to be less of that going on, at least in my view and the people I know and their children, than there was when I was a similar age. And I don't want to sound like the old guy, that walked uphill to school both ways in the freezing cold. But there is a difference, and I'm not sure whether I can attribute it wholly to the immediate feedback offered by these polygonal festivals of gore that are on the screens, or the expectation, I think, is different. Entertainment being more limited, certainly at my youth and then my parents and their friends, there was a lot more, when I talked to them, there was a lot more of, let's go out and do something, make something, build something, organize something. There was none of this sitting at home in the evening, glued to a radio or television, even at the time, wasn't something that you stayed hooked to for more than a half an hour program or some announcement or a news article. You got on and you did something else. That was an adjunct to your day, not an essential element of it. And I'm not sure I don't think we can reverse the trend, but we can just offer examples to other players who haven't been exposed to gaming before and say, this is fun and this is why, and give it a try and see if any of this strikes a chord with you.
As oftentimes happens, I had a conversation with a fellow in a Lyft, like an online taxi service. For our listeners that aren't familiar with the vernacular, Uber is the bigger of the two. The gentleman lives very close to me, and he is in his 20s, and he runs a YouTube channel, although he's now doing it on Twitch, associated with board games and adding drinking rules to board games. And I had a great conversation with him associated with the demise of endgames in Oakland. But also, his dream is to open a game store in San Jose, in the city I live in. And there are very few game stores in San Jose. There's one that's part of a Bay Area chain, which is reasonable. I don't even technically know if it's actually physically in San Jose, because it's actually on the cusp of another city. So anyway, he and I had a great conversation associated with, and an intergenerational conversation associated with the importance of physical games. And what I found fascinating through that is that I think the social aspect of this thing seems to be what is carrying on. I mean, certainly Matthew gives a great account of that with regards to his son's game and, the role that food and just general discussion and, doing things like painting miniatures. These things all are kind of cumulative in that. And I think so much of this stuff requires an initial experience. We both are here. I mean, Matthew talks about this as well. I'd love to get you and Matthew together to talk even more about this, associated with your first experiences getting into this thing. And from my perspective, I run a game at work, but most of my time is spent in this thing is spent communicating with miniature painters. And this is part of the hobby for me, which is pretty well the sole aspect of it now, is finding amazingly eccentric miniature painters and sending them figures from the early 80s to mid 80s, having them paint them and then getting them back. And this part of the hobby is something that I wanted to narrate in some regard. This seems to be an ideal opportunity because it doesn't strike me as really being anything that is communicative aside from me reliving looking at a white dwarf in the mid to late 80s at these amazingly elaborately painted things that was just so completely unattainable. And now for, a relatively small amount of money over a long period of time, I can get a few of these things sent back to me from artists all over the world. So it's interesting actually what this thing becomes, and obviously, as I look around my podcasting room, vast quantities of rule sets, things like that. I mean, so it's interesting. The social aspect for me is very much associated with this thing at work. But aside from that, and occasional conversations with Lyft drivers, the outward social aspect of it, I culturally and on a variety of levels don't really feel affiliated with the community that I'm in. The ability to play these games for me is through a very thin avenue at work in the nature of simulation, which I guess I talk about a lot here as well, but mainly through finding old figures, which I've found every old figure I need to find, and just working with these artists to create these things, these visual things. So it is interesting to me how I would even begin to translate that to another generation. I have a young niece, and, I have younger cousins that are at least a generation and a half younger than me. But none of this stuff seems to be intelligible to that generation unless they've had immediate exposure either through a parent or something like that. And historically, Lord of the Rings, the book, and the Tolkien genre introduced people to this thing as well. But increasingly, there are no films, books don't have an impact anymore. So I'm wondering what in the future could create another generation of gamers, or whether this is just a hand-down thing now. And, the whole thing strikes me as rather curious in terms of how it progresses forward to another generation. What are your thoughts on this specifically, Chris?
I believe that there will always be people who are interested in gameplay at some level or another, whether their interest stops at the level of checkers, or it moves on to chess, or it moves on to war games in terms of replaying or hashing out, saying, well, no, I think that this general should have been able to win at this position and he mismanaged, and they're trying to recreate or recapture or satisfy themselves that the the odds and the resources presented didn't allow something to happen in a way that they thought it was. So they've moved into simulation from strict adherence to a limited subset of rule execution. And there's always this progression in every hobby, though. You'll get somebody who likes to they get a car, or their father has a car, and they become interested in the car and how the car works, and they might learn how to change a tire, change brakes, and the next thing you know, they're doing tune-ups and swapping head gaskets out, and 10 years down the road, they've got a lathe in the garage and they're turning pistons. But then there are people who never go farther than turning the key in the ignition. And this level of it becomes that pyramidal shape. There's thousands of people who drive, and a few, an order of magnitude less that do their own repairs, and another order of magnitude that do advanced work, and then the tiny fraction that actually build their own things. And the same can be seen in gaming in general. There's a very huge upswell in the popularity of board games right now. And there's the board game cafes, like, for instance, Snakes and Lattes downtown Toronto here, which is packed all the time. I mean, you show up with yourself and your 3 friends at the door, and you're told it's going to be 45 minutes to an hour before you can get a table to play a game. That's the level, and it's a huge shop, and it's not the only location. They have multiple locations. So, and competition in the form of other stores. That sort of gameplay has seen. I never recall anybody when I was a young person, sort of mid-teens, where board games were that popular. Certainly none of the complicated board games, the Euro games that are now sweeping the market. Even if somebody played games of the day, it was Clue and Trouble and Mousetrap and things like that. That was the level of board gaming when I was younger. And the advanced ones, of course, did Risk and Diplomacy and Supremacy and whatnot. But again, the rarefied air, you were down to the tiny fraction that were doing these crazier board games. And then you stepped into Squad Leader and Panzer Blitz and the Avalon Hill SPI, SSI war games. But again, you're still following a preset structure of rules. There are limited choices in every case about what you can do with your resources. The role-playing games broke that mold, broke that paradigm. Now, the big thing was you can do anything you want. You can make any choices you want, which is a half-truth. There are limitations, but they're much more intangible than they are when you have a rule set that takes 2 8.5, 11 sheets folded, and that's your entire game. And you see in the role-playing games, you'll have people who will play and enjoy themselves thoroughly, and they work with a dungeon master or game master who has commercially produced modules, and they run through and they enjoy themselves, or they do Adventurers League or Pathfinder Society, and they go through the preset things. And again, you move to the subset of people who now start to write their own adventures and set their own worlds up. And then the smaller subset where we're sort of talking about what your idea is, writing your own rules. It's not about writing your own adventures anymore. It's about the fundamental principles behind what makes your world work. Defining them, and you are conveying them to other people. And I don't think right now the impressive boom in board games is not a sign that there are more more role-playing games being undertaken, although they are being done. There's a lot more participation and a lot more public acknowledgement that role-playing games are not for weird people who hide in the basement. The number of celebrities and the number of stand-up citizens that are involved in RPGs is vastly increased over what it was back in the day. But the board games and the role-playing games are two separate factions of gaming, and while there is some crossover, I don't think that because there are more board gamers that there will be more RPG players or people designing their own adventures or people designing their own rules. I think there's a septum between the two that separates them from a functional standpoint. So, gee whiz, I think I've gone off on a
no, perfect.
tangent, but
I think you've made the point very well.
When I walk into a game store and the place is packed with customers instead of it just being me and my two friends, and the stuff is flying off the shelves and they have multiple cashiers to do transactions, that I just can't seem to fathom it in one respect, because it seems so foreign or alien to my past experience. The 20-year gap between 95 and 2015, where I was absent, apparently the world undertook some major shift in how it viewed gaming and that sort of pastime. I wish there were more people that were involved in RPGs. I wish that certainly that there were some that were involved that matched my working shift conditions so that I could actually play instead of missing out. But I'm probably going to undertake something online or play by forum or something like that so that I can get my fix of gaming. But
what happened with the game at work was the gentleman who we started the game for realized that he liked this enough and actually took on an online game as well, which I think is run exclusively through Google Hangouts. So there are a wide variety of ways that you can connect with people internationally at times that work out well for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a phenomena which I personally have not explored, but I know exists because many of the Hangout versions also have YouTube channels where they actively broadcast the games.
Yes.
So I think what's fascinating is that this is, as we found with Model Rail Radio, the online community aspect of this thing should not be sniffed at in any way, shape, or form, and may actually bring forward the cultures that we want to maintain through, the broadest possible exposure. So, yeah, thank you for this analysis, Chris, because I think you've taken my idea, spun it around, done a few somersaults with it, dusted it off, and dragged it back to me in a much more splendid fashion. So thank you very much for the opportunity to put this one out. And I guess what interests me with regards to this particular format is that I am going to explore in my own way, whatever way that is, actually creating more rule sets and working out how I present them. I think the American Civil War, well, what I'm going to try and do with the Chechen conflict, because it's so abstract and very few people know about it in any meaningful terms, that I think I might be able to sneak that one in at work and play it quite comfortably. To be decided, actually.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for the opportunity to chat today and provide, these kind of insights. I did want to say before we conclude, we have made reference to this thing called Model Rail Radio. This was both of our overwhelming successes early on in the podcasting genre, perhaps because of the name, perhaps because of a variety of factors. But the way that it became so successful is people who listened to it actually told their friends about it and went into stores and started promoting it. The number of, I don't want to call them pirated flyers, but the number of flyers that were made by a variety of people to put in their hobby stores associated with Model Rail Radio is actually quite impressive. So if you're listening to this particular podcast and you're enjoying what we're doing, if you'd like to contribute, if you'd like to send us ideas or topics as Mike King has done historically, please do reach out to me. My name, my email address, Barbale, Bravo Alpha Romeo, Bravo Alpha Lima Echo Tango, @gmail.com. Chris, if folks want to reach out to you, what's your email address?
It is rpgfan@bell.net. That is Bravo Echo Lima Lima.net. And I want to just state that you don't have to contact us to agree with us. Contact us if you disagree with us. So that we can have a discussion about it.
Yes. If you're planning on rage quitting this podcast, send us an email before you rage quit. And we will be sure to dissect it. In terms, you haven't actually gotten, unfortunately, to Mike King's questions, Chris. So,
I'm looking forward to it this afternoon, actually.
Good. So, Mike King, thank you once again for sending in those questions. I hope I didn't brutalize them too much. Many of the questions required at least 3 takes of me saying the questions, and I thought, when I've communicated with more professional podcasts, they have typically rewritten my questions to make them more readable on the air, and perhaps I should have endeavored to do this with Mike's questions. Not that his questions were unreadable, just that for me, in any case, reading stuff out loud is never a good option. But certainly, if you enjoy this podcast, we have had some new listeners join the Facebook page as well. I know Chris isn't on Facebook anymore, probably for very wise reasons. But if you are on Facebook, look up My Rules Are Better. I think it's got My Rules Are Better, a podcast about creating your own rules. That's the name of the Facebook group. Please join the Facebook group. If you have questions, comments, ideas, anything, feel free to post to the Facebook group. I know we have a few listeners that have been posting various articles to the Facebook group. That's always well appreciated. In terms of your role-playing hobby, Chris, have you started a new game? What's going on with your weeklies and stuff that you do attend?
Well, unfortunately, I tried to undertake a participation in creation of a hex crawl, and I should know this by now. As soon as I undertake any new thing, the rest of my daily commitments and weekly activities seems to shoot through the roof, and I end up behind the 8 ball. But I was able to get some information set out for the hex that I was assigned, and in reading over the contents of what other people had generated for their hexes, because this is a group effort, I realized that I had this very low fantasy, mundane approach to my gaming that other people didn't seem to share. And I think in retrospect that might have been why some of the campaigns that I had run back in the 90s didn't really... They started off really well, a lot of enthusiasm, everybody was really keen on it, but they didn't end in a climactic, epic way, because I tried to create things that were logically consistent and interactions between different factions and different locations and town sites and power groups. But inevitably, I would describe a situation that was... It might have been tense, but it was stable. So there was nothing that was going to push the situation into turmoil, which is where all of the really interesting stuff happens.
Of course.
And it's distressing that it's taken this long for me to realize that it may be my fundamental approach to things that, while it could be as detailed as you'd like and have all sorts of interesting little tidbits of information and things to say, oh, that's really neat, I hadn't thought of that before. The sum total represents a stasis that is not conducive to generating those wonderfully memorable, epic stories that the players are really there for, right? They want to be the heroes of the situation. They want to be the amazing agents of change in something, and they want to come out on top, or even if they don't win all the time, they want it to be so epic and memorable that they'll be talking about it for years afterwards. And maybe I still have time to make a difference and change the way I approach things. But the hex crawl exercise was certainly interesting, and it forced me to get that creative, unlock that creative door again, and put something out for other people to comment on and criticize constructively. It's nice that the group that the online group that I'm participating with has for the most part, a very mature, laid back, intelligent response to how things are. It's not reactionary. When they see something, if they don't like it, they'll actually take the time to describe why and what, and maybe even offer, I think it would be better if you approached it from a different angle, or maybe considered this perspective, instead of saying, I hate it, it's garbage, you're a miserable person, like is so prevalent in other forums of discussion. So that has taken up a few days in amongst regular wage slavery and work. But other than that, we've had no opportunities to play. There was supposed to be a game last month that I missed for reasons of weather, and just the timing was so bad. We had one of the worst storms in the area for the year, and it was a long trip for me and not so very long for anyone else. And There will be one coming up in April, but weekly games are still out of reach. I might have a chance to do some one-on-one gaming with a young fellow at work who's on the same shift as I am permanently. Ooh. And his first experience with gaming RPGs was Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And he's over the moon for it. He thinks it's great.
Wonderful.
But his group of friends that got him into this have suddenly decided that, having children and buying houses and things like that is far more important than playing D&D.
Fools.
Well, I appreciate it. I understand fully the situations they're in. There are so many demands on younger people today, and such high expectations on them for work performance and personal gain and progress that something as seemingly trivial as getting together to play a game is left out in the cold. But I said, well, I don't think we can play D&D as a one-on-one because the expectation is that you're going to have a group of people playing.
I think you perfectly. No, I would disagree there, Chris. My view is that D&D works just as well for one player and a DM as it does for multiple. In many ways, you can actually create it's a very different experience, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But these games I spent a lot of my childhood actually DMing one person. And my view is that you can have full spectrum, multifaceted campaigns, campaign after campaign after campaign. In many regards, it's a different experience, obviously. Well, but it's just as rewarding.
I may be chickening out in some ways because I'm used to it's expressed in the latest edition of the rules that the 3 pillars of gaming, of RPGs are interaction, exploration, and combat. And I really like the lower levels in D&D. I think they offer the most opportunity for interesting that discovery phase and the having to work your way around problems in a creative manner because you can't just whip out a 10D fireball to eliminate the problem. But with a single player, I can certainly do the interaction, the exploration portions with a single player. But when you move into combat, especially at the lower levels, the opportunity to end up with a TPK because you've only got one player is remarkably higher. And I don't want to discourage him because while he's played a bit, he hasn't played a lot. And I don't want to turn him off the idea that anything that's worth doing is going to get him killed.
Can you find one other person to play with at work? I mean, who has similar work hours to you?
So far, the only other person that's on the same hours is only interested really in playing Traveler or playing the chit and paper tactical games.
Okay.
And
can you do Traveler? I mean, now you found a vein of Traveler recently, right?
Well, yes, yeah. Amongst I do have an extensive collection of the little black books from 77 and 81 that I didn't own back in the day, but I've found every excuse to purchase now.
Yes.
We could start it off in the Spinward Marches again at Regina and go forward in the 100-ton Type S scout ship. I'm sure there's something that could be done in that vein.
Yeah.
But availability, I'm going to consider it. I really like the 3 to 5 players in a group is the sweet spot for me.
Yes.
And I actually
find sometimes
had a discussion with one of a player of long experience, a GM of long experience, who has some extensive knowledge of the early days because he's an OSR fan as well. And one of the things that he said was back in the old days, basic D&D, well, OD&D, the original wooden box with the books, and basic, Holmes Basic, and First, they were expecting you to have a party of maybe 8 to 10 characters, or 8 to 10 characters, and possibly henchmen on top of that.
But how many of those were NPCs and how many of those were real characters? Like flared characters.
I think there were probably half that number of players.
Yes.
A lot of cases, but I'm thinking, well, that would go a long way to explaining how a first level magic user with 3 hit points and a dagger and 1 spell managed to make it to second level, because he was buried in this central mass of 0 level or first level henchmen.
Yeah. That
their paladin with his terrific charisma had managed to convince to accompany them on one of these dungeon crawls.
Yes.
And that would have really changed the dynamic of our early days of playing, because we typically had 5 people with 1 character each, and we would get smoked more often than not.
Yes.
2 or 3 doors into the crawl, we would end up spiking the doors and trying to get a full night's sleep to recover some spells or something. And that was ridiculous. It just seemed to be a terrible grind at that point. And I wished I could go back and try it again with the sort of the other people's expectations. Like our only source of information on how to play was available through the Dragon magazine or White Dwarf, or if one of us was lucky enough to have a subscription to one of the fanzines or APA publications like Alorums and Excursions or something like that.
Mm.
Only way you found out that you were doing something wrong unless you were going to a big convention.
Mm.
And I can't get the past back, but maybe I can try and help along the newer generation or the newer players into something that's not so discouraging.
In our conversation, as you may recall with Matthew, the fumbling in the dark, I think actually I reflect these erroneous rules, house rules, all this kind of stuff. This is the beauty of the thing. But unfortunately, mentioning regular adult life that we need to return to, I unfortunately need to do some escape into that as my Sunday disappears in front of me. Chris, it has been an absolute pleasure, as always, to have the chance to chat with you today. Hopefully we've sparked some ideas. We've got a few listeners that are willing to email us now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat today.
Always a pleasure, Tom. Next time we've got to talk about maybe playing cards. I think that subject hasn't been touched yet.
I've talked about it. You'll get to hear about it, maybe, a little bit into the last recording. But a pleasure as always, Chris. You have a wonderful Sunday. Take care.
Take care, Tom.